Hi.
Hi. Thank you. This is really cool.
This is cool for me. And I literally read the book in 2 days, and it's hard to find a book I think that you get into pretty much immediately. So for this book just had me hooked, and I just love the way that you created these characters.
I feel the same way about books. So, I mean, that's like kind of the most top tier compliment, right?
Critics have called this the next great millennial novel. Was that your intention when writing the book?
Well, I mean, I am millennial, and I do
Hmm.
think that, it that term gets sort of bandied about often with disdain.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I don't feel that way about it. I am millennial, so I think the book came out that way. The reference
Right.
points are, they're firmly in the 90s and the aughts. And in a way, to talk more seriously about what it means to like make a millennial anything is, I
Hmm.
think when we're talking about millennial art, we're often talking about instability, the
Hmm.
kind of instability a lot of us kind of came up in and then entered like the world as adults in, and then tried to
Hmm.
find meaningful work to do in the midst of all of that. And so
Right.
that's had great bearing on this book, in terms of
Hmm.
like it being like a millennial book, which I absolutely claim, and also wrote thinking a lot about like the millennial projects that have come before me that I also really
Right.
love.
Right. And I agree. I think the word millennial gets thrown about sometimes in a negative way. So to be
Right.
praised as a millennial, I think is a really cool and unique thing. And it also
Thank you.
shows, like that it's a whole generation of people whose stories I don't think get told often at a deeper level. So to be able to capture that is a
Yes.
really incredible thing to do. And how long did it take you to write this book?
So it took me about a year.
Hmm.
I was
Oh
living
wow.
in DC previously, like before I came back to New York. I'm from New York, but I moved away
Hmm.
for work, and I had just wanted to make a real go of it, and I had been like trying to work on a project for about maybe, yeah, 7 years.
Hmm.
And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to my city and see if I can, get
Hmm.
some traction. And so I got into the NYU MFA program.
Hmm.
And while I was there, I met a bunch of like, a bunch of peers, a bunch of people who were also trying to do the same thing, and also really
Hmm.
wonderful teachers and mentors who
Hmm.
guided me toward writing this book, in a
Right.
way that like I had a lot of kind of hard but necessary conversations about
Hmm.
what I wanted to try and put out into the world, for my first time. And so this was what I worked on. It was like my second year there, and my second and last
Hmm.
year there. And yeah, it
Hmm.
was about a year. It just kind of came out.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes, like when I'm talking to authors, you have to face a lot of yourself when writing, especially your first book. So I think
Yes,
it can be a very reflective process, as I've heard. So
that's
what
right.
was the inspiration for Lester? Like, how much of yourself did you put into this book?
There is a lot of me in it. I always
Hmm.
want to preface that by saying like this isn't an autobiography, but there is so
Hmm.
much of me in here. Like
Hmm.
even down
Hmm.
to like some of the family history I gave Edie, even down to some of the jobs she's
Hmm.
had. I've had some of the experiences she's had, obviously, I've had. And,
Hmm.
my first thing that I really loved doing was painting. And I put that aside kind of early on, but I've always been really obsessed with it.
Hmm.
And so that made its way into the book, like my love of painting, and also kind of honestly, while I was writing this book, what it meant to try and carve out time to do a thing that you really love, to do that
Hmm.
private work while trying to feed yourself, which is kind of what I was doing
Right.
while this book was being written.
Right. And you talk a lot about how Edie loves painting, but it's such a difficult thing for her to do and to get down and to finally sort of manifest into something she can hold.
That's right.
Um, yeah, why was that something that you chose to focus on in the book?
Because I mean, I think that is like it's one of the more crucial things to talk about in any art making process. Like, even if it's not a
Hmm.
painting, even if it's not a book, I think that there are natural and plentiful hurdles to jump before you actually break through. And I
Hmm.
wanted to speak, I think there's like a temptation to talk about the artistic journey in a way that is neat and in a way that is linear. But for me, that honestly wasn't the case. And I wanted to depict, what it looks like when a woman is thrown a crazy amount of detours, including the
Mhm.
detours that are self-manufactured, right? Because we can get in
Yeah.
our own way. So I did want to be faithful in depicting the fact that, failure is honestly is a huge part of it.
Hmm.
And it you can I think it's hopefully a liberating kind of depiction in that you can take steps backward, you can fail, you can
Hmm.
self-sabotage, you can also be subject to the things that you have no control over, but you can break through,
Hmm.
so that was why it was important.
Absolutely. And I think you capture, you talk about these things that get thrown at you, even when you bring them on yourself, and you talk about open relationships in such a real way. Why did you choose to have this be one of the center themes of the book? This open marriage between.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm often drawn to stories about affairs, to stories about marriage,
Yeah.
and in this way, I wanted to turn that on its head a little bit. I
Hmm.
wanted to write about what it looks like when two people have invited this disruption
Yeah.
into their relationship in hopes
Into
of
their home, even.
reinvigorating into their
Hmm.
home, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like the story around that, I wanted to be human. I wanted not to be
Yeah.
presented with judgment.
Mm.
And I also wanted to make room to talk about, those personal relationships, talk about sex, to talk about how it works when you kind of have to with an open marriage. You can only do
Hmm.
that, or an open relationship. You can only do that if there are rules, right?
Hmm.
And I think anything kind of based on rules begs for them to be broken. So I mean, I got to have fun with it on
Yeah,
the page in that
absolutely.
way, but it was a way to depict the way that is a careful and um,
Mm.
kind of tricky arrangement to maintain, because it's one that is about containment and also just, I don't know, two people trying to figure out a different way of making it work. And also, it feels like, this is the year 2020, and it felt like it that feels kind of, I don't know,
Absolutely.
yeah, like of our
Yeah,
time.
no, absolutely. It wasn't, I think the whole idea of that, it didn't seem like something so foreign. I think especially now
Right.
people are finding new ways to make families work, to make relationships work, and it's not
That's right.
always, black and white and what's been written about previously in literature. So to see that be
Yeah.
represented in a very real way where, yeah, you're right, it's not shamed in any way, no character is judged from that perspective. But I especially loved the relationship between Edie and Rebecca, and how you sort of created their own separate relationship throughout the book. And why was this important to touch on for you, this relationship between Rebecca and Edie?
So the, what I find most interesting and most compelling are often
Mm-hmm.
relationships between women,
Mm-hmm.
especially when they're complex, and then they can hold like the contradiction of both, um I mean, I guess the contradiction of both like adoration and savagery, like I think
Yeah.
that with Rebecca and Edie, they come from very two different worlds. Edie is,
Mm-hmm.
coming from a real state of precarity, and um, in fact, I feel like because when she's moves into the house, it's because she has time to actually create her work and to,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, to self-realize in a different way. But Rebecca is different, right? She's in control. She's
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. She has a few sort of preconceived ideas about how Edie, like a person like Edie would be. And so
Right.
in drawing them together, it was a lot of fun for me as a writer, but it was also, it was fun, and it felt necessary to talk about like the real like boundaries that are involved in
Mm-hmm.
merging two women like that, two very different women, but also the way that it can be like the way that it can be urgent in the way I think female relationships are, the way that
Mm-hmm.
it can be erotic in the way, even
Mm-hmm.
platonic female relationships are. So that was, you know, it occurred to me, like, I think a third of the way through the book, that there was more and needed to be more to a character to Rebecca's character than her just being like a wife, you know?
Yeah, and especially,
Yeah.
you didn't villainize her in any way. And I think
Right.
to make, what when the book is sort of being told, you know, by Edie, you could easily turn Rebecca into a villain. She's the wife, she's very controlling and this and that. And I think for you
That's
to
right.
create a relationship between them that's very complex, but also in a lot of ways, I think Rebecca takes care of Edie, and
Yes.
cherishes Edie for being there, for their daughter. So it just added so many layers to this relationship, and it almost focused more on that, I think, than the relationship between Edie and Eric. So
Yes.
I really loved, seeing their relationship sort of develop.
Thank you.
And power and powerlessness, I think, is a big theme throughout the book, especially for Edie. Can you talk about sort of her relationship to power and why it's so central to her character?
Sure. So Edie is, I want to say though, I did want to make room for her to like assert her power sexually, that was
Mm-hmm.
important, but it absolutely is. That's one of like the few places where she can. Ultimately, she
Mm-hmm.
is kind of, she's subject to environments which are racist, sexist, deeply capitalist, and she's struggling to, to lay claim to her art in the middle of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was important for me, especially telling the story in a way where you're inside of her mind, it's a first
Mm-hmm.
person. It was important to me that despite her powerlessness, which makes, kind of compels her to perform, you know, for her
Mm-hmm.
own survival, that we
Mm-hmm.
are privy to the inside of her mind and how she really feels, which is often like in
Yeah.
opposition with what she's presenting to survive. But also, powerlessness, I think it manifests in the sex too, right? Which is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, publicly her body is subject to well, I guess subject
Mm-hmm.
to a kind of subjugation. And I wanted to show a woman kind of seizing control of what she wants and
Mm-hmm.
presenting that in a way that didn't sort of pathologize her desire.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's a number of ways where I tried to talk about the way that powerlessness kind of vibrates through the
Yeah,
middle.
absolutely. And I think it
Yeah.
can also, that powerlessness can manifest in different ways. And again, like you said, she gains power through using her sexuality and taking control of it and feeling in
Yeah.
control of it. And I think, when writing sex scenes, especially, it can be tricky to sort of portray them, especially from a woman's point of view. How do you approach writing sex scenes? Because, there's always tension and awkwardness, and people will read into them. So, what was your approach to writing these sex scenes?
So I mean, I really wrote it in a way where I wanted the reader to feel that they were looking in on a private, kind of unstudied thing, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is, like when I watch something or read something, that's like when I feel most engaged or like
Mm-hmm.
most excited, which is when I feel like a voyeur a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wanted to make room for make room for the way that it is strange, the way the bodies are kind of strange and awkward and have this built-in drama, like it's,
Mm-hmm.
relative to whoever's body it is. But I wanted to be honest about that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
in kind of including the parts that are a little less pretty,
Mm-hmm.
that like there's that room is made for the ways that it really is kind of deeply gorgeous, like the way it is
Absolutely.
tender. So it was, yeah, it was more just I really wanted to be candid in a lot of ways with this book, but especially there where you
Right.
have a character like Edie who is kind of in a way like letting down her mask.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think also with a character, like Eric, who is in his own ways insecure, as a
Yeah,
40-year-old man
yeah,
and having his own insecurities. So to have these sort of two people sharing like the same experience, but experiencing it in very different ways and with their own insecurities and imperfections, yeah, it created just a very real view of what these sexual experiences are for most people.
yeah,
It doesn't always, not always written
yes,
like a love story would be, but that doesn't make it, not a love story.
that's right.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of impact did you hope this novel would have on people, or do you hope this novel would have on people?
So when I wrote this book, I really, it started off as sort of a, I don't know, when I write, it feels often like an exorcism in a way. Like I almost don't think
Absolutely.
about, the way that it will, what it will mean until I'm all the way at the end. But I will say that um, as a person who, took a kind of a long time to get to, or not a long time, but, for me, it felt like it, to
Yeah.
kind of be able to claim the thing that I wanted to do
Hmm.
my whole life. And as a person who sort of put things down and picked them up and left, you know, um,
Hmm.
some things that I really loved and, just put them aside, I wanted to write a story about art where room was made to talk about, you know, the way that the journey is jagged and the way that it is strange and how you should kind of allow yourself grace for however your
Hmm.
journey looks, and so I
Hmm.
think if there's anything I want people to take away from the book, among many things, I mean,
Hmm.
it is that to like um, be kinder to yourself in
Hmm.
your pursuit of your art because it's a process. It will always be a process. So I think
Hmm.
that is ultimately what I hope people come away from.
Yeah, and to be able to show people like this is my final product, but it wasn't a straight line to get here, and you kind of
Right.
explain that through Edie's point of view with how she struggles to create her art. You're kind of, I think, self-reflecting in that way where it's, yes, I did create something and I will create more, but it's not always just a linear path to get there, and that's part
That's
of
right.
it, not to see those failures and those self-rejections and self-questioning as, you know, a road stop. It's just part of
That's
that
right.
process. And so I love sort
Definitely.
of your way to narrate that within the book and sort of tell the readers your process of writing it.
Thank you. And I love the way you
And
put that the questions are part of it.
yeah,
Because sometimes it's hard to
absolutely.
know whether those questions or that doubt is a thing that
Hmm.
should make you stop,
Hmm.
right? Like you said, but it's
Absolutely.
it's part of it.
Yeah, and it often does, but I think the fact that we can push through and continue that and not let those stop us is so important. So the fact that you got this all out, I'm sure it was like a nice way to sort of purge, and that's such an important thing. You called it an
Yes.
exorcism, and you probably just can feel so much lighter being like, I can recognize these things and I can create something from them, and they might not always be the best, but it helps a lot of people for sure.
Thank you.
Of course. And are you planning to write anything else?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I honestly have not really started um, anything really new yet. But because mostly this book, like the
Hmm.
response has been amazing, and so a lot of work has come out
Yeah.
from that. So I'm mostly just kind of involved in
Hmm.
launching this book, but soon,
Yeah.
soon I'll get back
Yeah.
to like doing what I was put
I
here to
know.
do.
Yeah, but you should, I mean, just revel in it. I know you just got
Yeah.
nominated for the 2020 New Novel Award, which is so exciting. So
Thank
congrats.
you.
And yeah, you should take this moment because it's incredible. And thank you for coming on here. I'm like so honored that I got to talk to
No,
you.
thank you. This was really cool. Thank you so much.
Always. Well, I hope we get to talk again soon. And
Yeah,
congratulations on everything. And I'm excited for what else you have to share with us.
thank you.